Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see everyone could make it, and we make it to another Sabbath. We're going to talk more about the Sabbath actually tonight, and about some current events. A lot's going on out there, so we want to discuss that. So, if you would take us out, James.
I thought maybe we could initiate a new tradition. People can email me jokes at jricks84@yahoo.com, or send them to Ken, and maybe Ken can forward them to me through the Line Upon Line. And we can mention some of them on the air. We've gotten two from Australia, two one-liners from Australia. Two antennas met on a roof, fell in love, and got married. The ceremony wasn't much, but the reception was excellent.
Oh, man.
Okay, one more one-liner from the land down under. A jumper cable walks into a bar. The bartender says, "I'll serve you, but don't start anything." Here's a joke from the Ozark Mountains region of Missouri. Do you hear about the white-tailed deer that out-jumped the 5-story building?
No.
From Bill. Well, the reason he did it was because 5-story buildings can't jump.
Oh, my.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, now one final joke here. Husband and wife went to their high school reunion. After meeting several of her friends and former schoolmates, they're sitting at the table while the husband is yawning. He's totally bored at the high school reunion. The band cranks up something really peppy. There's a guy on the dance floor. He's living large. He's breakdancing. He's moonwalking. He's doing backflips. He's buying drinks for everybody. The works. The wife turns to her husband and says, "See that guy? 25 years ago, he proposed to me, and I turned him down." The husband said, "Looks like he's still celebrating."
I like that one. Those come from Australia?
No, that one is from just a typical, my typical source. I won't name all my sources, but it's a Texas source. That was from a Texas source. Okay, world events. Okay, you, Ken had something that you wanted to mention from Rome that you thought was interesting.
Oh yeah. The Pope was. I didn't get a chance to go in depth into it, but from on the surface, what it looks like, he was with some imams and said something to the effect that free speech is something about free speech and the fact that you can't say anything you want about anybody. You can expect to get in trouble, repercussions. So you say something about someone's religion and you might get punched in the mouth.
Free speech has limitations.
Yes. So he's kind of grouped himself in with these imams and saying that it almost says that, you know what, they wrote something bad about the prophet and they all got killed. That's their fault. Punched in the mouth is a lot different than killed. And so it seems that this guy is lining himself up and making himself the friend of everybody, even if it means, saying that it's all right to kill people if they don't agree with your, or if you insult their religion. So
I have a lady that comes in my shop frequently, and she's a devout Catholic, and she said her concerns with this Pope is that he took the name Francis because St. Francis of Assisi was the Pope that was allowed to make major doctrinal changes in the church. And she's afraid that this guy is going to do the same by taking that name that will give him the right to make these big changes.
Interesting.
Well, he's doing it. He's doing it, that's for sure.
He's certainly driving for it. He was lending support to the Islamic side of that event in France.
Yeah.
And
Basically saying it's their fault.
They're not such bad people. You shouldn't talk mean to them.
That's how he's going to get them. That's how he's going to hook them. That kind of stuff's how he's going to draw them in, man. He's working them.
Also, I heard from, I think it was a Glenn Beck show. He had some meetings with the Pope from the Eastern Orthodox Church, and well, at least it sounded like he's trying to make nice to put those two back together again. If ever that were achieved, that would be a huge religious empire. I'm not saying it isn't big now, but that would almost double it if that could be done. That's what he's working at. At least I believe that's what he's working toward. One thing, when Jefferson wrote the clause about freedom of religion in the Bill of Rights, he wrote the original for the state of Virginia. America was the first nation to have religious freedom. And very few nations have it even to this very day. Most countries have a state religion that you dare not insult, or most of them don't kill you, but there are penalties. And I think what America has been very unique. And I don't know, losing it, I mean, isn't it nice that we can say anything we want in an area of religion and there should be no retaliation, especially from the government or from violence? You know, people can criticize us, but we can criticize each other, but I mean beyond verbal criticism.
Right, right.
Well, the political correctness it's a mess, and you never know what you can or can't say. I taught a class today, had 26 people in it, and I said, if I say anything offensive, you only have to deal with me once. You know, because it wouldn't be offensive to me, or I wouldn't say it. But you just never know how somebody will take something.
That's true. The other big news item, they had the big rally with, I believe, heads of states and a couple secretaries of state from over 40 nations met. So most of the main countries in the world were there. All the major countries in the world were there, including some Islamic countries. Palestinians, Israel, Jordan, were all there in Paris holding hands in solidarity against Islamic terrorism. But the side story was the leader of the free world, had no representative there.
That's right.
Yep.
He's done that quite a bit. When Margaret Thatcher died, we had no representative there. But when Whitney Houston died, the flags went to half-mast in D.C.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that, Margaret Thatcher. I saw this story, and I don't remember the details, but it was in the London Daily News, and it said 10 things America has done in the last 4 years, a couple of years ago, to offend Britain, and that was one of them. But I don't remember what the others were.
Send back
the statue. The bust. Yes, yes.
Kicked out, and then they sent a special gift when the new president came in. That gift was sent back. They didn't like it. Just, I don't know, just things that offended the British government.
I remember one of them. Obama sent Queen Elizabeth an iPod
with all of his speeches on it.
Yeah, with all his speeches on it.
And apparently they don't play those kind of iPods in England. I have no idea why not, but it's poor gifting. Now some of that may just be a little bit of accidents, but all 10 of those things together, it just looks like we're not supporting our allies. And that,
right.
And now the question is, does that have any ramifications beyond just a little minor side misstep?
Well, I've got a theory that why he did not go meet with, why he wasn't seen in France. And it's because Netanyahu was there, and he could not be seen in solidarity with Netanyahu on camera. I think that was the reason he didn't want to be there, or at least one of them. It wouldn't surprise me if that wasn't it.
But, yeah, I agree. But the Palestinian guy Abbas was there, just one person over. Anybody see that? It was
Yes.
Abbas, the guy from Mali, and Benjamin Netanyahu, right in the middle. And the king of Jordan was there somewhere in the middle too. Two Islamic countries, and Egypt was there. I'm just saying, doesn't that sound odd to you that our president couldn't be? Well, here's what I would think. Isn't that what the vice president's for?
Yeah. But considering who our vice president is
But
afraid he'd say something stupid when he got there.
but honestly, a lot of countries would, in many cases, prefer to see the vice president because he may be the future president. And I'm old enough to remember vice presidents being sent all over the world when the president didn't want to go for whatever reason. That's what vice presidents are for. They have nothing. Well, I guess they're ceremonially in charge of the Senate, but you know what I mean. They don't have to.
Exactly. And if the vice president, for some valid reason, can't make it, then Tom Kerry should have been there.
Exactly.
But
And
he claimed it was nitpicking.
Right. Well, he showed up eventually with somebody to sing to the French.
That was after the
makes
pressure
it all
was
better.
on.
Yeah, I know. You're right.
But, you know, if it looks to us that we aren't supporting our allies, how does it look from our allies' point of view?
Well, I think, how does it look from our enemy's point of view?
countries like Iran, who we are cozying up to when they're clearly delaying because they want to build the A bomb, or be in a position to finish it whenever they want to. It looks, I don't know, it looks to me like, I don't know, is it some form of no solidarity with our allies and makes us look less imposing a world power if we don't have our allies with us?
Bringing us down.
Yeah, we did. By doing that, they kind of pull us out of the leading country of the free world, and they, reduce our power in the world and let everybody else come up. And that's, I think that's pretty much been the plan for the last 6 years, or maybe longer, much longer.
Well, our military is being cut quite a bit. I think it was my father told me that at the VA, when you go in to talk to a chaplain or whatever, they take you into a little tiny room, and all of any kind of religious symbols are all covered up, so that you can't see them from walking by the door or anything like that. They're trying to move religion out of everything.
Even the chaplain.
That's what I'm told.
Yeah, I heard the chaplains cannot say Jesus Christ in their prayer. I mean, even if they're talking to Christians, I thought, what kind of sense? That's what the Army's been told. That's what I've been told.
I've heard the same.
I thought, this is crazy. One thing is, as the world, well, remember we mentioned everybody's wondering what will the Russians do because this oil thing puts them into a crisis. It's gotten worse. Oil prices have actually gone down. I mean, they may, I don't know if they can go any lower than they are now, but with this crisis out there, something bad is going to happen, more instability, probably, I won't say for sure, but probably, is not going to make the Europeans want to come together politically without America because we're not supporting them enough.
Very well could.
That would fit.
With Russia going into the Ukraine and nothing being done or said, it makes us look very weak. And so Germany is trying to unite other European nations together so that they don't get run over by Russia. It's a mess right now.
Right. They're starting to realize they're on their own.
Yeah, I think
our absence of support leaves a vacuum that they'll try to fill it somehow as best they can.
Yeah, there's going to be a mad dash to fill it. China, Russia, maybe Europe, Germany, if they get if somebody's going to want to fill that vacuum that we're creating.
Did you hear? I think it was in Mark's newsletter a week or two ago. I don't know exactly when. Germany said, or the German president was at a big meeting of industrialists. He said Germany is going to have to build a world-class military, and everybody applauded. The Germans applauded.
I'm being told that they're bringing back, like in the school books and things, they used to show the German leaders, and they would have like the whatever, the swastika or whatever, and they'd have it bubbled out, grayed out. And I'm told that they're not printing those like that anymore. They're printing them like they were. And it looks to me like they're probably trying to rewrite history, like Germany didn't do anything wrong in World War II. That it was a righteous war, and we oppressed them.
I mean, let's face it. I think God blessed America to win World War II, and there are a lot of good things to say about America and Britain and the Soviet Union in the war. But just purely on a man-for-man basis, Germany had the best army in the world. They just were outnumbered, and Hitler stupidly, fought too many countries at once. Think about and his generals told him, you're going to fight the United States of America, the British Empire, and the vast Soviet Union at once. That's just stupid. But on a man-per-man basis, the German army was one of the best. I think, and they pioneered jet planes. They pioneered fighter aircraft. They pioneered submarines and missiles. Now, granted, I think as America built off the technology they started, maybe we surpassed them toward the end of the war on some of those items, but still, you realize that America may not get blessed by God in the future, and Germany could easily build the world's best military.
I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he said that Putin came out with a war against homosexuality and said that homosexuals, cross-dressers, transgender, all that stuff, we're not going to be allowed to have driver's license because they're not mentally stable. And so my friend was like, can you believe he did that? And I said, well, yeah, it's Russia. Who knows? But I said, if he really is doing that, and he's trying to put a stop to that, God might bless his country and curse ours because we're doing just the opposite. And he goes, well, I guess we need to find another subject.
By the way, according to Glenn Beck, and I realize that's Glenn Beck's idea, he says Putin is dyeing himself in the wool of the Eastern Orthodox Church as a savior of Eastern Orthodox Christianity and Christian values, and that's why not that he's really deeply religious, it's all for political purposes, but that's why he's taking on the gays, and he's saying it's up to Mother Russia to be the moral something of the world because America has become totally immoral. I know you're choking at the idea of Russia as more moral than America, but that's what Putin is saying in his speeches. I realize it's not true, but truth doesn't have to matter in politics.
That's true.
A lot of people will take that because that's something that they want to hear. It's something that they would like to hear.
Here's a scary possibility. I don't really think this will happen, but what if the Tsar in Russia is another word for Caesar in Russian. Let's say if the Tsar comes back or Putin takes his place, and he makes a deal with the United Europe, and they became one military force. Maybe 5 Western European kings, 5 Eastern European kings, including the Tsar. That would create a military force so big it would dwarf America, especially if the Germans built back up. I don't think that will happen. I think Europe can do it without Russia, but Putin is a clever guy. You never know what might happen.
Well, German engineering, they make equipment. They make tanks and things that are better. I mean, just good. Their vehicles are good cars. So apply that to military equipment.
Okay. By the way, today I thought we would look at one set of scriptures that I think have been misunderstood by people. Some use it to try to say, well, the Sabbath's not that important. It wasn't really emphasized. But regardless of that, I think it's a good set of scriptures, Hebrews 4, verse 1 through 10. And I think if we understand it better, it will actually help us in understanding, well, the Bible in general. And Paul has a warning in Hebrews chapter 4 for Christians. And I believe all the Bible is written for the end-time Christians. Now, this particular book is primarily written for Jewish Christians who wanted to go back to Judaism, to get away from some persecution and financial pressure. And, they could argue, well, look, the Jewish people still have the basic truths of God, and I'm not going back to rank paganism. But if you leave Jesus Christ, you're leaving the truth. And Paul is warning them, like I can see some of us saying, well, I can just leave the Church of God and go back to all the mainstream churches. There's a parallel that you could make there. I'm going to start off in Hebrews 4:1. This is the King James I'm reading. Let us therefore fear, and I emphasize the word fear because you wouldn't be afraid if there's nothing to be afraid of, lest the promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. In other words, Paul is saying, you people I'm afraid that you're going to slide back and miss the rest of God. Now, I want to go to verse 9, which is the more controversial verse. Most people debate it a little bit. Hebrews 4:9. There remains therefore a rest to the people of God. In my Bible, which is a Schofield kind of addition to the King James, there's a middle column, and by the word rest, there's a little marker. You go up to the marker, and it says, probably should be translated, keeping of a Sabbath. I looked at the Greek interlineary. The word that's translated rest is sabbatismo in Greek, from all the Greek manuscripts. By the way, no one questions that that's the word. As the King James translators translated rest. Most of the translations say what should have been in there is still a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And so you could argue the King James translators got the kind of the contextual meaning of rest, but they left out the word Sabbath. And you're going to say, well, why did they leave out the word Sabbath? There are probably two reasons. They may even be one and the same. One is, got to remember, the committee that did the King James translation worked for and were patrons of the King of England, who was head of the Church of England. And which day did they go to church on?
Exactly. Mine says Sabbath rest.
Yeah. But now there's another possible reason for it, but they may all be the same. All those scholars that were used, and for many, many centuries before that, the only Bible that scholars could get in Europe was the Latin Vulgate, because the Catholic Church basically kept other translations out until the time of Tyndale, and, well, this was another breakthrough, King James, but prior to that. So all of those guys would have grown up possibly reading the Latin Vulgate, which also leaves the word Sabbath out too. But I say both of those are one and the same kind of error. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me, and I think that once they interpreted it to English, it would have been real difficult to tell everybody and all. Remember, Great Britain was huge. To tell everybody, "Oops, it's changed days." It'd be a real headache.
And by the way, from the book, The True History of the True Church, they trace Sabbath keeping back to the 15th and 16th and 17th century in England. So there were some Sabbath keepers there, and a lot of them came to America during the early Pilgrim days. So and England, well, all those European countries, most of them were fighting over religion in that time period. So I'm sure they didn't want to give any support to Sabbath keeping.
Yeah, I agree.
But most people don't know that. But I think the verse, but apart from the Sabbath, there's a meaning to Hebrews 4 that goes beyond just that. let's see, we read verse 1, and basically, I'm going to pick it up in verse 3 and 4, and then we can just talk about it a little bit. I think Paul is giving a message to us modern Christians that we have to not be like the Israelites. Anyway, well, I'll pick it up in verse 2, because sometimes you have to read the whole thing to see the entire context. For unto us was the gospel preached as well as unto them. The them he means are the Israelites who refuse to go in the promised land. Was preached unto as well as unto them. But the word preached to them did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. For we which believed do enter into rest, as he said, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall not enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. And he's quoting Psalms 95, verse 7 through 11. And God was mad at the Israelites, at least the original older generation, because when they came to the promised land, they didn't trust God. They said things like, well, those Canaanites, some of them were giants. We're like grasshoppers. Or they've got fierce armies. Or their cities have high walls. We're afraid to go in. And what's interesting is they had seen all kinds of miracles from God.
That's always baffled me to see. If you see Moses come, and then there's frogs, and there's blood in the water, and there's fire and brimstone, and ice, and then the death of all the firstborns. No light for 3 days. You have light in your house, but there's no other light. How could you not have faith after this? And then you're released. You're set free after 430 years from the greatest captor of all. How could you not have faith? I mean, what does it take?
And
sometimes I think we make the same mistakes.
And they walked through the Red Sea, but no
Dry
faith.
shot.
Yeah. That's amazing. It was dry. I assume one side of it at least was a wall of water, and you just walked by it. And yet Pharaoh's army got drowned in it. Actually, the original movie, The Ten Commandments, does a pretty good job on that scene.
The whole movie was terrific.
I mean, and ever since then, Hollywood does not seem to be able to make a decent religious movie.
Well, the one that's out now on the same subject, the lead actor apparently is out calling Moses schizophrenic and violent and a terrorist and everything else. So it's a guy that doesn't know his Bible.
Right. That's kind of
Moses,
wow, they can't make a decent religious movie anymore.
The Bible script is there. All they have to do is write a play following that script, but Hollywood just can't seem to do it.
It's already written for them.
Yeah.
There's no decent directors and actors, and there's no decent bunch is long gone.
Well, they're naive
So they
enough
can't
to
do
think that they can improve upon the biblical story.
Well, and they're trying to change it because our kids don't read their Bible.
Trying to improve it.
Their churches aren't teaching them what it says, so they go watch the movie and they think that's what it was.
The original Ten Commandments stuck to Scripture. That's why that became such a great movie. It was a true story.
But we knew that back then.
Yeah. Nowadays they take what they call theatrical liberties. They come up with these terms to make it sound legitimate, but it's nonsense.
Yeah.
In other words, they step away from the truth.
Yeah. Moses is a crazy man. I mean, that's really almost blasphemous in one context. That's Hollywood's view.
I had a man call me. He says, "I don't want a sermon. Moses, good guy, bad guy." I said, "Moses, a great guy." I said, he actually saw the back of God and talked face to face basically with God. God handed him the Ten Commandments. He taught him the cleanliness laws and the food law. Moses was a great guy. And he said, well, this guy that's making the movie says he's a terrorist, a schizophrenic. I said, he freed thousands and thousands of people from slavery and gave them their own land. And he goes, okay, well, I've heard enough. I trust you. So
yeah, and he wrote the Pentagon.
The Bible says that it is sinful to take away from or add to the Word of God, doesn't it? As far as I'm concerned, then these people that are producing these movies are guilty of that sin.
They're going to have to do some heavy repenting. And by the way, some of them are Jewish who should know better.
And maybe do know better.
And Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, which is the foundation. And Moses and Christ are put in parallels. I mean, obviously Christ is first. And the book of Hebrews talks about that, but still Moses is next to Christ in importance. So anyway, remembering when the Israelites got to the promised land, they didn't go in, and that's the rest that the Israelite was going to get, the physical rest. So that's what Paul is telling these Jewish Christians. And then he says in verse 4, and by the way, the rest is from the foundation of the world. When God founded the world, he rested on the 7th day, and he made it holy, but most of us know that. Verse 4, for he spake in a certain place of the 7th day on this wise, and God did rest on the 7th day from all his works. And in this place again they shall enter into my rest. Seeing therefore it remains that some must enter therein. In other words, some people are going to enter. They to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief. In other words, they didn't trust God. And Paul would tell us, trust God. Don't get discouraged. Don't backslide. Trust God. Trust God. That's really the message. And he's telling those people not to backslide back into the Jewish world, in our case, back into the mainstream. And notice it did say, we should read it carefully. Did I read verse 7? I'll read verse 6 and 7. Verse 4 says, the 7th day on this wise. So it does mention which day of the week the Sabbath is. That's why some Protestants don't like that verse, because it tells you the 7th day. So, seeing therefore it remains that some must enter their rest. Again, verse 7 again, he limited a certain day, not any day, but a certain day, saying in David, today, after so long a time, as it is said, today if you will hear my voice, harden not your hearts. For if Jesus, and by the word in verse 8, Jesus and Joshua are the same word. But Joshua would make more sense to us English-speaking people. So I'm going to read it with Joshua, and then I'll explain why it makes more sense. For if Joshua had given them rest, they would not afterwards have spoken of another day. In other words, Joshua was just the first step. It wasn't the final thing when Joshua led Israelites into the promised land. There remains therefore a Sabbath rest, verse 9, for the people of God. And let me explain this part about verse 8 about Jesus and Joshua. In Hebrew, the name is Joshua, but in Greek, it's Jesus. But it's the same name. It's like in French, it's Henri. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. But in English, it's Henry. Did I pronounce that right, honey? Henri. It's the same name, but just different languages. But what the English language does, and I believe it's the same in Spanish, it's Jesus, but same principle, the J and H. We take the word directly from the Greek into the English. And the English language borrows words from other languages like that. So Christ is taken, it's not Messiah, it's taken directly from the Greek. And so is the word Jesus, taken directly from the Greek and English. And that's just the way the English language is. So my argument is that people who say, well, we should try to say it in the original Hebrew. Well, two things. One, God speaks English, so he knows what we're saying. But the other big thing is, if it was that important, the New Testament is all in Greek. Whenever it's in Greek, it mentions God's name and Jesus' name, and they use the Greek. And God allowed the Bible-inspired apostles to write it that way. If it was so important that they had to write it in Hebrew, well, it would have been preserved and written to us in Hebrew. And God's name is also written in Greek. It's not the Hebrew names. Not that it's wrong to, talk about some of God's many great names, I am the eternal and all that, but I'm saying is this idea that you have to say it in Hebrew just doesn't fit the New Testament.
God invented all language, so I'm certain when you pray to Him and read about Him, it's okay to do it in a language He invented.
Yeah, He made all these languages, or the roots of them. At Babel, Tower of Babel, believe me, God speaks English better than we do, and knows exactly what you mean. Now I think there's three parts of this that can be considered. The three levels of rest that he's talking about. One is Israel, physical Israel, was led by Joshua into the promised land of Canaan, and that's the physical rest. But they missed out. The first generation had to die in the desert because of unbelief, and Paul is saying, don't be like them. Keep your faith. Don't you think that it's hard for us to keep our faith in a generation where the devil seems to be having his way everywhere?
You know what? In some ways, I can understand your statement. Another way, I think it kind of pushes me to keep my faith, because the more I see it, the more unhappy I am with it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So my son, he'll friend somebody on Facebook. If they post something on there that he don't like, they're done. He says, I won't have anything to do. There's TV programs. He'll be going through the channel and say, turn that off right now. I'm not going to put that in my mind. I'm done. And that's kind of where I am. The more I see, Florida was last week decided that homosexual marriage was acceptable now. All it does is push me deeper into my Bible, because I see where this is leading.
Me too, because I consider those things dangerous.
They're physically dangerous, because the history of any nation that's done that just gets destroyed.
Can we go back to languages just for a moment? Let me ask you something, James.
Go ahead.
Languages were confused at Babylon. What was the original language? The language that was spoken before that time, the single language.
All I know is the Bible says, I have to look up the verse, God is going to give us a pure language in the future. That implies that there is no pure language now. By the way, do you know that Hebrew comes from a root language the same as Arabic? I mean Aramaic. Arabic. That is a language, the Arab language. And then there's a bunch of languages that the people in the Middle East speak. Hebrew is one of those Semitic languages. Hebrew is not a pure language. As far as I know, there is no pure language, but it's coming in the future.
The original language must have been the purest up to that time.
Yes.
My theory is, basing it on just growing up in the churches, probably was a language that everyone spoke, regardless of nationality or whatever. And when God decided to confuse the languages, He took that one back. And that was based on naming things what they were and on truth. And the language we use today, some of it's not always truth. The words change meanings and stuff. Yes. So when He comes back and He gives us a pure language, it's probably going to be the original. He probably just took that back and said, let them live in confusion.
And some languages, when you study a foreign language, the first thing you usually discover is, no matter how simple it appears on paper, there are a lot of exceptions, tricks, weird pronunciations, grammar rules that, I don't want to criticize any one language, but things that you say, what in the world will they put the verb there for? Does that make any sense? And there's some weird languages out there.
English has got to be the worst for that.
It does, but it also teaches you a thought process. As opposed to turn off the lights, they'll say close the lights. They'll turn it around. It shows you the thinking process. I knew a girl whose father spoke Spanish, and she seemed to understand but couldn't speak Spanish. But she said one day, she goes, "I need room leg." It's
Room
a
leg?
thought process. Yeah, I need room leg. And so it just
I don't
shows.
know where I came from. My grandma always said, "Cut off the lights." So
Yeah.
Yeah, same here.
cut the lights off.
That was south of the Mason-Dixon.
Yes, it was.
But language is a tricky thing, and but the fact that Jesus was Joshua, but in English it's Jesus, and so and not to confuse people, we should speak English to English-speaking people. And the new covenant saints were being led by Jesus toward our ultimate promised land, which is being a member of God's family. So Paul is also telling us, as well as the people in the book of Hebrews, to not give in, to hang in there. And in the third level of this section, Paul is also saying that every week on the Sabbath, we leave the wicked world of whatever you want to call it, and we go to our Sabbath rest. We spend time with the brethren, and we try to be in our little small promised land of let's say, more of a Bible-oriented Christian world. And I think that's what Paul is saying. I'll read in verse 9 and 10 again. There remains therefore a Sabbath rest to the people of God, for he that entered into his rest, he also has ceased from his own works, as God did from his. So in a sense, we cease from our busy worldly stuff every week, and we rest with God. And then in verse 11, he says, let us labor, or some translations say, let us be diligent to enter into that rest. I think keeping the Sabbath every week is like a discipline that helps us stay with God.
Yep.
And for me, it's a chance to go to church and to fellowship with somebody who thinks like I do. And we talk about these things and kind of help hold the other guy's hands up,
That's probably the biggest part of the Sabbath for me.
Yeah, I enjoyed sitting and talking with the people and spending that time. I've got a scripture in Hebrews. I may have read this before, but Hebrews 10:25. It says, let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as we see the day approaching. So he's talking about meeting together consistently. Verse 26, if we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sins is left, but only fearful expectation of judgment and a raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Moses wrote down the Sabbath law for us, not the fourth commandment. So if these are the laws that if those are the laws that Moses wrote, I think this is a little fearful for somebody who would give up the Sabbath.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're condemned.
That's a real good scripture you read, Dave. And I was reading the one right before it. Let's read the 2 verses right before it, verse 23 and 24 of Hebrews 10. Would you like to read those 2 verses, Dave, the 2 verses right before 23
Yes.
and 24?
Yes, I will. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful, and let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. And that is another thing the Sabbath certainly does. Good call.
It's good. We can use our Sabbath to try to encourage each other to hang in there and to do more good things.
Yep.
Every Sabbath, and hopefully maybe listening to this podcast will help some of us encourage each other. Maybe we can pray that the Great Wall of China that's blocking our podcast in China, maybe China will take it down. What do you think?
So it's not making it over there?
No, if they want it, they can get it. They just
Okay.
it's.
But you got to have a backdoor way to do it, right?
If they're blocking this, I don't know if they are. They may not. I don't know if. I don't think China blocks all of YouTube. They just block. They may or may not. This may or may not be blocked because it's religious. It may be blocked. I don't know because that's what.
All I know is we used to get a lot more hits on our website from China, and this wall must be blocking. I guess we're saying, I don't know, the Chinese government. Oh, this is on tape, so be careful what I say. They say they have freedom of religion, but I wonder if they don't want their people hearing too much of what we're saying.
Well, I'm sure they don't want. They don't understand what we're saying, but what they don't want is people getting too much religion and then the state becomes secondary. They want the state to be their god. So that's what they want. So.
And they're probably getting it for the most part, don't you think?
Yeah, they could. It's well known how to route around all their blocks and stuff over there. So the people that live over there and are somewhat savvy, they get around it.
Well, that's good to hear. So at least a lot of them can get around it if they want to.
Yeah, you can get around anything if you know it. If you're determined enough, you can do it.
I heard that our government's encouraging other governments to start monitoring Facebook. And I don't know if it's exactly another social media. Is the government going to start trying to censor social media? Heard some discussion of that. I have no idea what that means. And I guess what we do is not considered social media, right? Although some of it's on Facebook, isn't that correct?
Yeah, some of it is. Yeah. At this stage, they're not looking for anybody just expressing their religious beliefs and discussing it. At this stage, that's not an issue. Maybe someday in the future, but right now, they're not touching that. And but who knows?
They're just looking for people that are saying violent things, probably now.
Yeah,
right?
they're looking for people that are potentially an issue against what the narrative is now. So, and we're not. We don't mess with that. We're non-violent.
With small potatoes too.
Yeah, we don't bother nobody.
You know, talking about the getting around things or whatever, I knew a guy probably close to 30 years ago who was convicted felon for like just dozens and dozens of things, and he was a teenager and he figured out how to hack into the prison computers and started early releasing people. And they caught him. He got in a ton of trouble.
I bet he was making a fortune.
They caught him and they convicted him, but he didn't do any time. The deal was he was like 16 years old. So the deal was he had to teach them how he did it so they could close it up. So he taught them how he did it, and he was a convicted felon, I guess, until he was 18 or something. But
and today he's running security for Sony, right?
Who knows?
He's the IT guy for Sony today, right? He's running their servers. Oh man!
Out of Korea.
By the way,
there you go.
I thought maybe I could get away with one little tiny joke before we mention next week. We're supposed to, on the schedule, next week we're going to do Is the Law Fulfilled? And by fulfilled, we mean done away. That's the way it's often expressed. And that's a topic that it's not exactly original, but we probably ought to kick it around because a lot of people, that's their big argument. The law's been done away by being fulfilled. Is that what it really means? Now, for my closing joke. Okay, get the laugh track ready. No. This is a short one, very brief one. The federal government has been very critical of the NFL. The federal government, which has Tomahawk cruise missiles, Apache Lakota helicopters, and used the code name Geronimo in the attack to kill Osama bin Laden, but objects to the name Washington Redskins.
Oh.
And they're not too happy about Kansas City Chiefs either. There's political.
Yeah, I wonder when they're going to come after them next. Hey, before we sign off, I'd just like to thank a couple of people. I noticed we had a new subscriber, Diane Whitna. I hope I pronounced that last name right. Carolyn and her husband, who watch us every week, and Randy and Elaine, which are brethren in Australia. Tracy, who watches, and our friends in Trinidad and Tobago. So, those and everyone else that watches, we wish you all have a great and happy Sabbath. And good night, everyone.
Good night.